The sound of iron shackles rattling against the polished wood floors of the passenger car drowned out Penelope Morrison's pleas as two burly men dragged her down the aisle of the Denver-bound train. Tears streamed down her dirt-smudged face. The elegant blue traveling dress she'd saved for months to purchase now torn at the sleeve and soiled with coal dust from the train's chimney. This wasn't how her journey west was supposed to end in chains, accused of theft and facing imprisonment before even meeting the man whose advertisement she'd answered 3 months prior. "I didn't steal anything." Penelope cried out, her voice cracking as the taller of the two men yanked the chain, forcing her to stumble forward. "Please check my belongings again. This is a terrible mistake." "Save your breath, lady," growled the shorter man, his deputy's badge glinting in the afternoon sunlight as they approached the exit. "Judge Williams don't take kindly to thieves, especially ones who come to our territory pretending to be proper mail-order brides." The year was 1878, and for 22-year-old Penelope, the promise of a new life in Colorado territory had been her salvation after the textile factory in Boston closed, leaving her destitute. The advertisement had seemed heaven-sent. Respectable rancher seeks educated Eastern lady of good character for matrimony, passage provided. But here she was, in the dusty town of Silver Creek, being hauled off the train in chains for allegedly stealing a diamond brooch from a wealthy passenger, a brooch she'd never even seen. As the deputies dragged her down the iron steps to the platform, Penelope's gaze darted frantically across the crowded station, silently begging anyone to help her. Most folks averted their eyes, mothers pulling their children close, men tipping their hats down as if her misfortune might be catching. "Please," she whispered hoarsely, "I'm innocent." That's when she saw him, a tall figure leaning against a hitching post at the edge of the platform. Unlike the others, he didn't look away. Even from 30 paces, Penelope could feel the intensity of his stare beneath the wide brim of his Stetson. His posture changed as he observed her situation, pushing himself upright with a deliberate slowness that drew her attention even through her panic. "Where are you taking her, Denton?" The deep voice carried across the platform, causing the deputies to halt. "None of your business, Flynn," the taller deputy called back. "This one's a thief, caught her red-handed on the eastbound." Flynn Xanders stepped forward, spurs jingling with each purposeful stride. The crowd parted for him, respectfully or fearfully. Penelope couldn't tell which. He was dressed simply in dusty riding clothes, a worn leather vest over a faded blue shirt, but something in his bearing commanded attention. At perhaps 30 years of age, his face bore the weathered lines of a man who spent his days under the harsh western sun. That right. Flynn's eyes, a startling clear blue against his tanned skin, met Penelope's for a brief, electric moment before returning to the deputy. "Because I reckon I just watched Mrs. Hollister place that brooch back in her reticule before disembarking on the far side of the train." The shorter deputy tightened his grip on Penelope's arm. "You calling us liars, Xanders? I'm saying maybe you boys were too quick on the draw." Flynn moved closer, and Penelope noticed his hand resting casually near the holster on his hip. "Seems mighty convenient that Judge Williams' son-in-law reported a theft just as the prettiest mail-order bride in 3 years steps off the train." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Penelope felt her cheeks flush despite her predicament, both at his compliment and the implication of corruption. "You got no authority here," Denton sneered. "Go back to your horses, Cowboy." Flynn's mouth twitched into what might have been the ghost of a smile. "I got the authority of being right." He turned toward an elderly man in the crowd. "Mr. Peterson, you're headed to the judge's house for dinner, ain't you? Might be worth mentioning you saw his daughter wearing that supposedly stolen brooch not 10 minutes ago." The old man hesitated, then nodded. "That's true enough." Denton's face reddened, but his partner looked suddenly uncomfortable. "Dent, maybe we should shut up," Denton hissed, then raised his voice. "This woman's coming with us until we sort this out proper." With a movement so swift Penelope barely registered it, Flynn closed the distance between them. There was a flash of metal, a sharp cracking sound, and suddenly the weight of the chains fell away from her wrists. Flynn had produced some manner of tool and broken the linking mechanism of her shackles. "I don't think she is." Flynn said calmly, though Penelope could see tension in every line of his body. Denton reached for his gun, but Flynn was faster, his hand closing over the deputy's wrist with obvious strength. "Don't," he said simply. For a suspended moment, no one moved. Then, with a fluid motion that stole Penelope's breath, Flynn swept her into his arms. She gasped, instinctively wrapping her arms around his neck as he turned away from the deputies. "This is kidnapping," Denton shouted. "It's rescuing," Flynn corrected without looking back. "Miss Morrison here was expected by her intended 2 days ago. I'm just delivering her where she belongs." Penelope stiffened in his arms. "How do you know my name?" she whispered. His eyes met hers briefly. "I'll explain later. Hold tight." With that, he strode through the parting crowd toward a magnificent Palomino horse waiting at the edge of the station. Behind them, she could hear the deputies arguing with each other and members of the crowd, who were now vocally questioning their motives. Flynn lifted her effortlessly onto the saddle before mounting behind her. His arms encircled her as he took the reins, and despite everything, Penelope felt a curious sense of security in their strength. "You best have a mighty good explanation for this, Mr. Xanders," she said with all the dignity she could muster, though her heart was racing from fear, relief, and something else she couldn't quite name. "I do," he assured her as the horse broke into a trot, leaving the station and bewildered deputies behind. "But first, let's put some distance between us and Silver Creek. Those two might be corrupt, but they're stubborn as mules." As they rode into the golden afternoon light, Penelope realized with a mix of terror and exhilaration that in less than an hour, her life had changed course completely, and she was now entirely in the hands of a stranger who had just broken her chains and carried her away. The Palomino's steady gait ate up the miles as they followed a winding trail away from Silver Creek. Flynn kept the horse at a brisk pace until they crested a rise overlooking a wide valley. Only then did he slow their mount, allowing Penelope to catch her breath and take in her surroundings. "We should be safe enough to talk now," Flynn said, his voice close to her ear. The unexpected intimacy of their position, her back pressed against his chest, his arms framing her body as he held the reins, was becoming increasingly apparent to Penelope. "You could start by explaining how you knew my name," she said, trying to maintain some semblance of propriety despite their circumstances. "And perhaps why you involved yourself in my predicament." Flynn guided the horse to a small grove of cottonwoods beside a creek. "Been expecting you," he said simply, dismounting in one fluid motion. He reached up to help her down, his hands spanning her waist with careful respect. "Your letters described a woman arriving on the Thursday train from St. Louis. When you didn't show 2 days ago, I got worried." Penelope's feet touched solid ground, but her mind was spinning. "My letters? Sir, I believe you are mistaken. I was corresponding with a Mr. Edmund Blackwell of Summit Ridge Ranch." A shadow passed over Flynn's face. "Edmund Blackwell was my partner." He removed his hat, revealing dark hair streaked with premature silver at the temples. "He died 3 months ago in a flash flood while moving cattle across the river." "Oh," Penelope felt suddenly lightheaded. I'm very sorry for your loss, but I don't understand." "I received a letter confirming my arrival just before I left Boston." Flynn's jaw tightened. "I sent it. After Ed died, I found your letters among his things. You'd already sold everything and purchased your ticket." He replaced his hat, adjusting the brim. "Seemed wrong to leave you stranded with no place to go." Penelope took a step back, wrapping her arms around herself. "So there is no marriage arrangement?" It wasn't a question, but a statement of her new reality. "No, madam," Flynn's expression was unreadable, "but there is a job if you want it. Summit Ridge needs a schoolteacher. Town's been trying to establish a proper school for 2 years now." A schoolteacher? Penelope's education at Miss Holloway's female seminary suddenly seemed relevant in a way she hadn't anticipated. I do have experience teaching." "Figured as much from your letters." Flynn moved to untie a canteen from his saddle. "You mentioned working with factory children back east." He offered her the water, which she accepted gratefully, taking a small sip before handing it back. Their fingers brushed, and Penelope tried to ignore the small shiver that ran through her at the contact. "Mr. Xanders, while I appreciate your intervention, this is hardly proper. I cannot simply ride off with a man I've just met, regardless of your intentions." A ghost of a smile touched Flynn's lips. "Madam, I just broke you out of custody. Proper flew out the window about an hour ago." He gestured to the remnants of the shackles still hanging from her wrists. "Let me get those off you." From his saddlebag, he produced a small tool kit. With careful precision, he worked the locks until the iron cuffs fell away, revealing angry red marks on her skin. His fingers lingered for just a moment over the abrasions before he stepped back. "Thank you," she murmured, rubbing her wrists. "Those deputies there in Judge Williams' pocket," Flynn explained, packing away his tools. "He's been trying to buy Summit Ridge Ranch for years. Ed refused to sell, and so have I. And you believe they targeted me as some form of retaliation," Flynn nodded. "Williams controls most of Silver Creek. Having his men detain you on false charges would have been easy enough." He paused. "I'm sorry you got caught in the middle of this." Penelope considered her options, which seemed alarmingly few. She had no money left after purchasing her ticket, no contacts in Colorado territory, and now apparently no fiancé. And yet this stranger had risked himself to help her. "The teaching position," she said carefully. "Would it include room and board?" The schoolhouse has living quarters attached. "Simple but clean, and the pay's fair $15 a month." It was less than she'd made at the factory, but with no rent to pay, she might actually save more. Still, one thing bothered her. Why would you go to such lengths for a woman you've never met? "You could have simply written to inform me of Mr. Blackwell's passing." Flynn turned to check his horse's saddle girth, avoiding her eyes. "Like I said, seemed wrong to leave you stranded." He hesitated. "And Ed spoke highly of you in his letters to me, said you had spirit, reckon he was right." There was more to it, Penelope suspected, but she didn't press. "Very well, Mr. Xanders. I accept your offer of employment at least until I can establish myself properly." Flynn nodded, seemingly relieved. "Good, Summit Ridge is about 3 hours' ride from here. We should reach it by nightfall." He helped her back onto the horse before mounting behind her. As they continued their journey, Penelope found herself studying the landscape, the sweeping vistas of the Colorado territory, so different from Boston's crowded streets. Massive mountains dominated the western horizon, their peaks still capped with snow even in late spring. Closer at hand, the rolling foothills were carpeted in wildflowers and sage. "It's beautiful," she said softly. "Gets under your skin," Flynn agreed. "Can't imagine living anywhere else now." "How long have you been here?" 7 years. Came out after the war, needed open space after what I saw back east." Penelope nodded, understanding. Many men had sought new beginnings in the West after the horrors of the Civil War. "You fought for the Union, 5th New York Cavalry." His voice was neutral, but she felt a slight tension in his body. "You lost someone, my brother, at Antietam." She hadn't meant to share something so personal, but something about the vast openness surrounding them made secrets seem pointless. They rode in companionable silence for a while. Penelope was acutely aware of Flynn's presence, the steady rhythm of his breathing, the occasional brush of his arm against hers as he guided the horse. It was strangely comforting, despite the impropriety of their situation. "Tell me about Summit Ridge," she said eventually. Flynn seemed to relax as he described the small settlement nestled in a protected valley. "About 30 families now, mostly ranchers and a few miners. Got a general store, blacksmith, doctor of sorts. Church doubles as the schoolhouse, but they've almost finished building a proper one. And the children I'll be teaching? 22 at last count, ages 6 to 16. Been getting their schooling from Reverend Porter's wife when she can manage it, but she's expecting their 4th child." Penelope found herself growing curious about this community that had built a school before they even secured a teacher. It spoke of priorities she respected. "What about you?" she asked. "Do you have family in Summit Ridge?" There was a pause before he answered. "No. Just the ranch hands and the stock." Something in his tone discouraged further questions on that subject. As the afternoon waned, they followed a narrow trail that wound through a stand of ponderosa pines. The scent of resin filled the air, mingling with the earthy smell of horse and leather. Penelope found her eyelids growing heavy, the emotional and physical exhaustion of the day catching up with her. "You can rest," Flynn said quietly. "I won't let you fall." Too tired to maintain propriety, Penelope allowed herself to lean back slightly. The steady rhythm of the horse and the solid presence behind her lulled her into a light doze. She wasn't sure how long she'd slept when Flynn's voice brought her back to awareness. "Penelope. We're here." Blinking away sleep, she straightened and gasped softly. Below them lay a picturesque valley, bathed in the golden light of sunset. A cluster of buildings formed the town center, smoke rising from chimneys as evening meals were prepared. Surrounding the settlement were fenced pastures and scattered homesteads. In the distance, a two-story ranch house stood sentinel over the landscape. "Summit Ridge," Flynn said, a note of pride in his voice. "It's lovely," Penelope breathed, suddenly nervous and excited all at once. This would be her home now, at least for the immediate future. As they descended into the valley, Penelope attempted to smooth her travel-worn dress and tidy her hair. "I must look a fright," she murmured, embarrassed at the thought of meeting her new neighbors in such a state. "You look fine," Flynn replied, then added more softly, "better than fine." The unexpected compliment warmed her cheeks, and she was grateful he couldn't see her face. They rode directly to a small building set apart from the others. It was freshly painted white with green shutters, and Penelope recognized it immediately as the schoolhouse Flynn had mentioned. Beside it stood a modest cabin, presumably the teacher's quarters. As Flynn helped her dismount, the door of the nearest house opened and a woman hurried toward them. She was perhaps 50, with silver-streaked dark hair and a kind face. "Flynn Xanders, is this her? We'd nearly given up hope." The woman's warm smile included Penelope. "I'm Martha Donovan, dear. We're so pleased you finally arrived." Before Penelope could respond, Flynn spoke. "Mrs. Morrison had some trouble in Silver Creek. William's deputies tried to detain her on false charges." Martha's expression darkened. "That horrible man. Are you all right, dear?" "I am now, thanks to Mr. Xanders," Penelope said, finding her voice. "Though I'm afraid there's been a misunderstanding. I came expecting to meet Mr. Edmund Blackwell." "Oh," Martha's hand flew to her mouth. "You haven't told her." Flynn's jaw tightened. "I explained about Ed." Understanding dawned in Martha's eyes. "I see. Well, there will be time to sort everything out." She took Penelope's arm. "You must be exhausted. Let's get you settled in your quarters and find you something to eat." As Martha led her toward the cabin, Penelope glanced back at Flynn, who was watching them with an unreadable expression. "Thank you," she called back to him, "for everything." He touched the brim of his hat in acknowledgement. "I'll check on you tomorrow," he promised, before turning his horse toward what she assumed was the direction of his ranch. Martha tutted as she opened the cabin door. "That man. Rides 15 miles to town every day for 2 weeks waiting for you to arrive, then barely says 2 words of welcome." "He's been coming to town every day?" Penelope asked, surprised. "Ever since we expected you. Said he felt responsible." Martha lit a lamp, revealing a simple but comfortable interior. "There's more to Flynn Xanders than meets the eye, dear. Now let's get you a bath and some supper. Tomorrow's soon enough to face the rest of the town." As Penelope stepped into what would be her new home, the events of the day washed over her in a wave of exhaustion. From captive to schoolteacher in the span of hours, it was almost too much to comprehend. Yet underneath her fatigue was a curious flutter of anticipation when she thought of Flynn's promised visit tomorrow. Whatever the future held in Summit Ridge, she suspected it would be far different from anything she had imagined when she boarded that train in Boston. The first rays of morning sunlight filtered through the cabin's curtains, gently rousing Penelope from the deepest sleep she'd experienced in weeks. For a disorienting moment, she didn't recognize her surroundings: the simple pine furniture, the braided rug on wooden floorboards, the small pot-bellied stove in the corner. Then memory returned: the train, the false accusations, the chains. And Flynn Xanders breaking them before carrying her away from danger. Penelope sat up, pushing her long chestnut hair from her face. Martha Donovan had been a godsend the previous evening, providing not only a hot meal and bath, but also a nightgown and several dresses that had belonged to her daughter before she married and moved to Denver. "They might be a touch short," Martha had apologized, "but they'll serve until you can have new ones made." Now, Penelope selected a simple blue calico dress from among them. It was indeed a bit short at the ankles, but otherwise fit well enough. After washing at the basin and pinning her hair into a modest chignon, she felt almost presentable. A knock at the door startled her. Smoothing her borrowed dress, Penelope opened it to find Martha holding a basket covered with a checkered cloth. "Good morning, dear." I thought you might need some provisions to start. Martha bustled inside, setting the basket on the small table. Bread, preserves, some eggs and bacon. Oh, and coffee. Can't have a teacher falling asleep during lessons. You're too kind, Penelope said, genuinely touched by the woman's thoughtfulness. Nonsense. We've been waiting for a proper teacher for ages. Martha uncovered the basket, revealing its generous contents. Now there's to be a welcome gathering at the church this afternoon. Nothing fancy, just a chance for folks to meet you before school starts on Monday. Penelope felt a flutter of nervousness. Monday, that's very soon. Children have been running wild too long already, Martha said with a smile. Besides, it'll help you settle in, having work to do. As Martha helped her prepare a simple breakfast, she filled Penelope in on Summit Ridge's history and residents. The town had been founded just after the war by a mixture of homesteaders, ranchers, and those seeking silver in the nearby mountains. It had grown steadily, if slowly, over the past decade. Flynn Xanders and Edmund Blackwell built the largest ranch in the valley, Martha explained as they sat at the table. Pair of Union veterans with more determination than sense, some said, but they proved the doubters wrong. Summit Ridge Ranch employs half a dozen hands now and runs nearly 500 head of cattle. Penelope picked at her eggs. Mr. Xanders mentioned that Mr. Blackwell died 3 months ago. Martha's expression grew somber. Terrible business. Flash flood swept him away while they were moving cattle across the river. Flynn nearly died trying to save him. She sighed. Those two were like brothers. Flynn hasn't been the same since. This insight into Flynn's loss gave Penelope a new perspective on his gruff manner. He mentioned that he found my letters after Mr. Blackwell's death. Yes, it was Flynn who insisted we still prepare for your arrival, said Ed had made a commitment to you and we should honor it. Martha poured more coffee. The town council agreed to offer you the teaching position immediately. 22 children need schooling, and none of us have the learning to do it proper. After breakfast, Martha showed Penelope the schoolhouse. It was a single large room with rows of simple benches and desks, a blackboard mounted on the front wall, and a small desk for the teacher. Shelves held a modest collection of books, readers, mathematics primers, even a few volumes of history and literature. It's not much compared to Eastern schools, I'm sure, Martha said, watching Penelope examine the space. It's wonderful, Penelope replied honestly. In the factory district, we taught in a converted storage room with no proper books at all. She ran her fingers along the smooth surface of the teacher's desk. This is a palace in comparison, Martha beamed. Wait until you see the children, eager as puppies, most of them, though I should warn you about the Hemsworth twins, 9 years old and full of mischief. They spent the morning organizing the schoolroom and discussing the curriculum Penelope would implement. By midday, she felt more confident about her new role and increasingly grateful for Martha's guidance. As they left the schoolhouse, Penelope caught sight of a rider approaching from the north, a familiar figure on a Palomino horse. Despite herself, her heart quickened. Speaking of determined men, Martha said with a knowing smile, looks like Flynn's made good on his promise to check on you. Flynn dismounted in front of the general store across the street, exchanging words with the proprietor before turning toward them. He'd shaved, Penelope noticed, and wore a clean shirt under his vest. The change made him look younger, highlighting the strong line of his jaw and the startling blue of his eyes when he removed his hat in greeting. Mrs. Donovan, Miss Morrison, he nodded to each of them. Trust you found your accommodations suitable. Very much so, Mr. Xanders, Penelope replied. Thanks to Mrs. Donovan's kindness. Martha waved a dismissive hand. I've things to attend to before the gathering. Perhaps Flynn could show you around town, Penelope. Before either could respond, she was bustling away, leaving them standing somewhat awkwardly outside the schoolhouse. Flynn cleared his throat. Would you like that tour? Penelope hesitated only briefly. Yes, thank you. I should like to know more about my new home. He offered his arm with a formality that surprised her. As she placed her hand on his sleeve, she was struck again by the solid strength of him, not just physical, but a kind of quiet certainty that was oddly reassuring. Summit Ridge was small enough that they could walk its entirety in less than an hour. Flynn showed her the general store, the smithy, the doctor's house, and the small church where services were held on Sundays. Throughout, he was greeted respectfully by the townspeople they encountered, though Penelope noticed some curious glances directed their way. "They're just surprised to see me in town 2 days running," Flynn explained when she mentioned it. "I'm not much for socializing." "Yet you rode 15 miles daily awaiting my arrival," Penelope said, recalling Martha's comment. A faint color touched his tanned cheeks. "Felt responsible," he muttered. "After reading your letters to Ed, he trailed off, seemingly uncomfortable. "What was in my letters that compelled such dedication, Mr. Xanders?" Flynn led her to a bench overlooking the town's small central square. "You wrote about teaching those factory children despite the owner's objections, about organizing food for families during the mill strike." He sat beside her, keeping a respectful distance. "You showed courage, Miss Morrison. That's rare enough to be worth protecting." Penelope was startled by his assessment. "I merely did what anyone would do." "No." The single word was spoken with such conviction that she looked up, meeting his gaze directly. "Most people look away from injustice. You didn't." There was something in his eyes, a recognition, perhaps, that made her breath catch. For a suspended moment, neither spoke. The spell was broken by the approach of an elderly man leaning on a carved walking stick. "So this is our new schoolmarm," he called out cheerfully. "'Bout time you brought her to meet us, Flynn." Flynn stood. "Judge Porter, this is Miss Penelope Morrison." Miss Morrison, Ezekiel Porter, former circuit judge and our resident legal authority. The old man's handshake was surprisingly firm. "Pleasure, young lady. My Eliza's been teaching the little ones when she can, but with number 4 on the way." He patted his rounded belly in illustration. "We're mighty glad to have a proper teacher at last." "I'm eager to begin," Penelope said sincerely. "The schoolroom is better equipped than I expected." "Flynn saw to most of that," Porter said with a nod toward the cowboy. "Ordered books from Denver, had the desks built special." Penelope glanced at Flynn in surprise. "You didn't mention that," he shrugged uncomfortably. "Town paid for it. With money from Summit Ridge Ranch," Porter added with a wink to Penelope. "This young man donated half last year's profit to the school fund." Flynn's expression made it clear he hadn't wanted this information shared. "Just doing what Ed would have wanted," he said gruffly. "He believed in education." Judge Porter smiled knowingly. "Indeed he did." "Well, I'll see you both at the gathering later." With a tip of his hat, he continued on his way. When they were alone again, Penelope turned to Flynn. "You've gone to considerable trouble on my behalf, Mr. Xanders." "On the town's behalf," he corrected. "Summit Ridge needs a school. Even so, I find myself increasingly indebted to you." Flynn shook his head. "No debt between us, Miss Morrison," he hesitated. "I need to check on some supplies at the general store. Would you like to accompany me, or shall I escort you back to your cabin?" "I'll join you, if you don't mind," Penelope said. "I should become familiar with what's available here." As they walked toward the store, Penelope found herself studying Flynn's profile. There was a quiet dignity about him that she found compelling, a steadiness that belied his relatively young age. Unlike many men she'd encountered, he didn't seem to feel the need to dominate conversation or impress her with tales of his accomplishments. The general store was typical of small Western settlements, a single large room filled with goods ranging from foodstuffs to fabric, tools to tobacco. The proprietor, a rotund man named Harold Fleming, greeted Flynn warmly before turning his attention to Penelope. "Miss Morrison, welcome to Summit Ridge." His handshake was enthusiastic. "My wife's been talking of nothing else since we heard you were coming. She was a teacher back in Pennsylvania before we moved west." "I look forward to meeting her," Penelope said politely. While Flynn discussed an order of fencing supplies, Penelope explored the store. She was pleasantly surprised by the variety of goods available, perhaps not as extensive as Boston's shops, but far better than she had anticipated in such a remote location. "We get new stock monthly from Denver," Fleming explained when he noticed her interest. "And anything special you need, we can order. Takes about 3 weeks usually." As they were leaving the store, Flynn carrying a small package he'd collected, a commotion down the street caught their attention. A dust cloud preceded the arrival of 2 riders, and Penelope felt Flynn tense beside her. "Sheriff Briggs," he said in a low voice, "and one of William's deputies." Penelope's hand instinctively went to her wrist where the shackles had been. "The ones from yesterday?" "No, different deputy." Flynn's expression was grim. But nothing good brings Williams' men to Summit Ridge. They watched as the riders dismounted in front of the small sheriff's office. The local lawman, a stout man with an impressive mustache, emerged to greet them. "Should we avoid them?" Penelope asked quietly. Flynn considered this. Better to know what they're after. He guided her toward the gathering, his hand coming to rest lightly at the small of her back, a protective gesture that she found herself appreciating rather than resenting. Sheriff Briggs spotted them approaching and raised a hand in greeting. "Xanders, just the man we were discussing." His tone was friendly enough, but there was wariness in his eyes. Flynn nodded to the sheriff before acknowledging the deputy with a cooler, Morris. The deputy, a lean man with a pockmarked face, gave Flynn a tight smile. "Xanders, this the woman you abducted yesterday?" Penelope felt Flynn stiffen beside her, but his voice remained steady. "I didn't abduct anyone. Miss Morrison was being wrongfully detained." Sheriff Briggs looked uncomfortable. "There's been a complaint filed in Silver Creek. Flynn says you assaulted 2 deputies and interfered with an arrest." "Those deputies tried to arrest Miss Morrison on false charges," Flynn replied. "Judge Williams' son-in-law claimed she stole a brooch that multiple witnesses saw his wife wearing after Miss Morrison was detained." The deputy stepped forward. "That's not for you to decide, Xanders. Law's the law. And which law says it's acceptable to frame an innocent woman?" Flynn's voice remained calm, but Penelope could sense the anger beneath the surface. Sheriff Briggs held up a hand. "Easy, both of you." He turned to Penelope. "Madam, I don't want to cause you distress, but I need to understand what happened." Penelope straightened her spine. "I arrived on the afternoon train from St. Louis. As I was collecting my belongings, 2 men identifying themselves as deputies accused me of stealing a diamond brooch from another passenger. Despite my protests and requests to search my bags, they placed me in chains and began forcibly removing me from the train." The sheriff's bushy eyebrows rose. "They shackled you without searching your possessions first?" "Yes." Mr. Xanders intervened when he observed that the supposed victim was actually wearing the allegedly stolen item. Morris snorted. "Convenient story." "There were witnesses," Flynn said flatly. "Mr. Peterson, Mrs. Gardner, the conductor, all saw Mrs. Hollister wearing her brooch after Miss Morrison was detained." Sheriff Briggs studied them both thoughtfully. "Morris, you ride back and tell Judge Williams if he wants to pursue this, he needs to send someone with sworn statements from those deputies and the alleged victim." He turned to Flynn. "And you, Xanders, next time you witness an injustice, maybe try working through proper channels before breaking a woman out of custody." "There weren't any proper channels in Silver Creek," Flynn replied. "Not with Williams controlling everything from the sheriff's office to the courthouse." The deputy looked ready to argue, but Sheriff Briggs cut him off. "That'll be all, Morris. I'll handle things from here." With obvious reluctance, the deputy mounted his horse. "Judge won't be happy, Briggs." "Judge Williams' happiness isn't my concern," the sheriff replied evenly. "Justice is." After the deputy rode away, Sheriff Briggs sighed heavily. "Flynn, you've stirred up a hornet's nest. Williams has been looking for an excuse to come after you since you refused to sell him grazing rights last year." "I'm aware." Flynn's expression was resolute. "But I wasn't about to let his men railroad an innocent woman." The sheriff shook his head. "Noble, but possibly foolish." He tipped his hat to Penelope. "Madam, welcome to Summit Ridge. Despite this unpleasantness, I think you'll find we're generally a peaceable town." As he walked away, Penelope turned to Flynn. "It seems I've brought trouble to your doorstep, Mr. Xanders." His eyes met hers. "Trouble was already there, Miss Morrison. Williams has been trying to control this valley for years." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Besides, some things are worth the trouble." The intensity in his gaze made her heart flutter unexpectedly. She looked away, flustered by her reaction. "I should prepare for the gathering this afternoon." "Of course." Flynn hesitated, then added, "I'll be there." "In case Williams tries anything further." As he escorted her back to her cabin, Penelope found herself wondering about this complex man who had appended his life to honor a promise his friend had made to a woman he'd never met. There was more to Flynn Xanders than was immediately apparent, and despite the complications of her situation, she found herself increasingly curious to discover what lay beneath his reserved exterior. The welcome gathering at the church exceeded Penelope's expectations. Nearly everyone in Summit Ridge attended, bringing dishes for a communal supper and genuine warmth for their new teacher. Children regarded her with a mixture of curiosity and excitement, while parents expressed relief that formal education would finally be available. Throughout the evening, Flynn remained a steady presence nearby, not hovering, but positioned where he could intervene if needed. Penelope found her gaze drawn to him repeatedly, noting how others sought his opinion and deferred to his judgment despite his relative youth. "He's the heart of this community, though he'd never admit it," Martha Donovan murmured, following Penelope's line of sight. After Edmund died, many thought Flynn might sell the ranch and move on. Instead, he dug in deeper, determined to build what they'd planned together. As the gathering wound down, Penelope found herself sitting on the church steps, watching the sunset paint the valley in shades of gold and purple. The beauty of it stole her breath, so different from Boston's crowded skyline. "Different view than you're used to," Flynn said, settling beside her with a respectful distance between them. "It's magnificent," she admitted. "I never imagined such open spaces existed." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment before Flynn spoke again. "How are you finding Summit Ridge so far? Everyone has been remarkably welcoming." Penelope smoothed her borrowed dress. "I admit, when I answered Mr. Blackwell's advertisement, I wasn't certain what to expect." Flynn's expression softened slightly. "Ed would have made you a good husband. He was the best man I've known. You were close. Met in the war, both of us too young, seeing things no one should see." Flynn looked out over the valley. "Afterward, neither of us could settle back into normal life. Came west together in '71, worked other men's ranches until we saved enough to buy our own spread." His voice grew quieter. 7 years building something from nothing. Then in an instant he was gone. The raw pain in his voice touched Penelope deeply. "I'm truly sorry for your loss, Mr. Xanders." "Flynn," he said, "reckon after everything you might as well use my given name." "Flynn," she repeated, the name feeling strangely intimate on her lips. "Then you must call me Penelope." A small smile touched his mouth. "Penelope." The way he said it with a kind of gentle reverence sent an unexpected warmth through her. Before either could speak again, Martha approached. "Penelope, dear, I've collected some recipes from the ladies to help you get started with your cooking. And Flynn, Tom Henderson was asking about borrowing your hay baler next week." The moment broken, they rose to their feet. As Martha led Penelope toward a group of women eager to share their homemaking wisdom, she glanced back to find Flynn watching her, an unreadable expression in his eyes that nonetheless made her pulse quicken. The next day, Sunday, Penelope attended church services with Martha, meeting Reverend Porter and his very pregnant wife, Eliza. The service was simple but heartfelt, and Penelope found herself moved by the community's evident faith and mutual support. Flynn sat near the back, nodding politely to those who greeted him but maintaining his characteristic reserve. When their eyes met briefly during a hymn, Penelope felt a curious connection, as though they shared a secret understood by neither but recognized by both. Monday morning arrived with a mixture of anticipation and nervousness. Standing before 22 children of varying ages, Penelope felt a familiar sense of purpose settle over her. This was what she knew: the shaping of young minds, the unlocking of potential through knowledge. The children proved eager if somewhat unruly, their education having been sporadic at best. By midday, Penelope had assessed their abilities and begun organizing them into appropriate learning groups. The Hemsworth twins, red-haired boys with identical mischievous grins, lived up to Martha's warnings, but responded well when Penelope channeled their energy into helping the younger children. When the school day ended, Penelope stood on the steps watching her students disperse. Some were collected by parents, others walked home in groups, all calling goodbye with more enthusiasm than she'd expected on a first day. As the last children disappeared down the road, Penelope noticed a familiar palomino approaching. Flynn rode up to the schoolhouse, leading a second horse, a gentle-looking bay mare. "Successful first day?" he asked, dismounting. "I believe so," Penelope replied, unable to suppress a smile. "Though I've discovered some significant gaps in their learning that will need addressing." Flynn nodded toward the bay mare. "Thought you might need transportation. Summit Ridge isn't large, but some of your students live a fair distance out." Penelope stared at the horse in surprise. Is this, for me, she's called Daisy, gentlest mare on the ranch. Flynn patted the horse's neck. She's yours if you want her. Flynn, I couldn't possibly accept, it's not charity, he interrupted. Consider it part of your position. A teacher needs to reach all her students, including those too far to walk. Penelope approached the mare cautiously. The horse nudged her shoulder with a velvety nose, making her laugh. She's lovely, but I must confess I've limited experience with riding. She'll teach you, Flynn said with confidence, and I could show you the basics if you'd like. Before Penelope could respond, a rider galloped into town, heading straight for the sheriff's office. Something in the man's urgent manner caught Flynn's attention. Stay here, he said, mounting quickly. He rode toward the commotion, leaving Penelope holding Daisy's reins. Within minutes, a small crowd had gathered outside the sheriff's office. Penelope hesitated only briefly before leading Daisy toward the gathering, her curiosity overcoming her hesitation. Martha spotted her and hurried over, face tense with worry. Rustlers hit the Peterson place last night. Stole 20 head and shot their oldest boy when he tried to stop them, Penelope gasped. Is he? Alive but badly wounded. Dr. Miller's with him now. Martha lowered her voice. Sheriff thinks it's Williams' men they've been pressing Peterson to sell for months. Across the street, Flynn emerged from the sheriff's office with several other men, including Judge Porter and Tom Henderson. Their expressions were grim as they conferred intensely. They're forming a posse, Martha explained. Peterson's place is just 3 miles from Summit Ridge Ranch. Flynn's concerned his cattle might be next. Penelope watched as Flynn mounted his horse, checking his rifle before securing it to his saddle. Something cold settled in her stomach at the sight. Is it dangerous? Martha's expression was solemn. Rustlers don't surrender peacefully, dear. Especially if they're working for someone like Williams. As the posse prepared to ride out, Flynn turned his horse toward Penelope. The other men continued past him, giving them a moment of privacy. I need to go with them, he said simply. Penelope nodded, unable to articulate the sudden fear gripping her heart. Please be careful. I will. He hesitated, then reached down to touch her hand briefly. I'll come find you when I return. She watched him ride away, the setting sun casting long shadows across the town. Only as the posse disappeared from sight did Penelope realize she was still holding Daisy's reins, the mare standing patiently beside her. Come, dear, Martha said gently. Let's get you and your new horse settled in. Worry won't bring them back any sooner. The night passed with agonizing slowness. Penelope prepared and taught her classes the next day with half her mind constantly wandering to Flynn and the others. Had they found the rustlers? Were they safe? The questions circled endlessly as she guided her students through reading exercises and arithmetic problems. When school ended, Penelope remained at her desk, grading simple assignments to distract herself from her concerns. The sound of horses approaching sent her hurrying to the window, but it was only Mr. Fleming delivering supplies to the general store. As twilight approached, Penelope finally returned to her cabin, tending to Daisy before attempting to prepare a simple meal. Her mind refused to focus on the task, causing her to burn the biscuits and oversalt the beans. A knock at her door startled her so badly she nearly dropped her plate. Setting it aside with trembling hands, she hurried to answer. Flynn stood on her doorstep, hat in hand. His clothes were dusty, his face showing signs of exhaustion, but he was gloriously, wonderfully alive. You're back, Penelope said, unable to keep the relief from her voice. Just now. His eyes searched her face. May I come in for a moment? Propriety demanded she refuse. An unmarried woman shouldn't entertain a man alone in her home. But propriety seemed a distant concern compared to her need to know he was truly safe. Please, she said, stepping aside. Flynn entered, his tall frame making the small cabin feel even smaller. He remained standing just inside the door, maintaining a respectful distance. Did you find them, the rustlers? Penelope asked. We did. His expression darkened. 4 men. They admitted Williams hired them to pressure Peterson and others who have resisted selling. Were you forced to? She couldn't finish the question. No deaths, Flynn assured her. 2 wounded when they tried to fight. Sheriffs holding them all in Silver Creek. Now even Williams can't interfere with an open case of rustling and attempted murder. Thank goodness. Penelope unconsciously pressed a hand to her heart. I was worried. Something shifted in Flynn's gaze, a softening, a vulnerability she hadn't seen before. "Were you, of course." The admission came easily, surprising her with its sincerity. "I've grown fond of Summit Ridge. I would hate to see harm come to any of its residents." Flynn took a step closer. "Is that all you were concerned about? The town?" Penelope felt her cheeks warm. "No," she admitted softly, "not all." The moment stretched between them, taut with unspoken feelings. Flynn was close enough now that she could see the fine lines at the corners of his eyes, the slight shadow of beard beginning to darken his jaw. "Penelope," he began, his voice low, "I know this isn't what you came west for. You expected a husband, a settled future. Instead, you got a schoolhouse and trouble." "I got more than that," she countered. "I got a community, purpose, and—" She hesitated, gathering her courage. "And I met you." Flynn's eyes widened slightly at her boldness. "I'm not Ed," he said carefully. "I'm not the man who wrote those letters." "I know exactly who you are, Flynn Xanders." Penelope took a deep breath. "You're the man who broke my chains and carried me away from injustice, the man who honored his friend's commitment to a stranger, who donated half his profits to build a school and rode 15 miles every day to meet a train that might never arrive." Flynn's expression was one of wonder, as though seeing her anew. "When I read your letters to Ed," he said slowly, "I felt I knew you already, your courage, your heart." He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of rare uncertainty. "I told myself I was just doing right by Ed's memory, but the truth is, I wanted to meet the woman who wrote those words." The confession hung in the air between them, honest and vulnerable. "And now that you have?" Penelope asked softly. "Now I find myself wishing I'd answered your advertisement myself." The words were barely above a whisper, but they resonated through her like thunder. Penelope stepped closer, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his gaze. "It's not too late to write your own letter, Flynn Xanders." His hand came up to cup her cheek, calloused but infinitely gentle. "Penelope Morrison," he said, his voice husky with emotion, "I may not have fancy words or grand promises, but I offer you my respect, my protection, and if you'll allow it, my heart imperfect as it is." Tears pricked at Penelope's eyes, not of sadness, but of a joy so unexpected she could barely contain it. "I accept," she whispered, "all of it." Flynn's smile transformed his face, erasing the worry and weariness of recent days. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he lowered his head until their lips met in a kiss as tender as it was passionate. When they finally separated, both slightly breathless, Flynn rested his forehead against hers. "I should go," he said reluctantly, "before I forget myself entirely." Penelope nodded, though she made no move to step away from him. "Will I see you tomorrow? And every day after, if you'll allow it." Flynn pressed one more gentle kiss to her forehead before retrieving his hat. "I'll speak with Reverend Porter about publishing the banns, if that suits you." The question, so formal yet so heartfelt, made Penelope smile. "It suits me very well." At the door, Flynn turned back. "I never believed in fate until I found your letters. Now I think perhaps some things are meant to be, even when they follow unexpected paths." Like a mail-order bride dragged off a train in chains, only to be rescued by a cowboy she never knew existed, Penelope said with a touch of humor. Flynn's laugh was warm and genuine. Exactly like that. As she watched him ride away into the gathering dusk, Penelope reflected on the strange, winding path that had brought her to this moment. What had begun with fear and injustice had transformed into something beautiful and unexpected. Tomorrow she would stand before her students again, helping them build futures of their own. And afterward, Flynn would be waiting, not the husband she had traveled west to meet, but the one her heart had chosen for itself. Sometimes, Penelope thought as she closed the door, the most precious gifts arrive in the most unexpected packaging, like freedom offered by a stranger strong enough to break chains and gentle enough to heal the wounds they left behind.